The black community, and the black community, a lot of individuals have a weird way of couching their anti-Blackness as constructive criticism, tough love, keeping it real, telling one's truth. And this is not exclusive to black women. There's a lot of brothers doing this too. There's a lot of black men doing this also. And they're not factoring history. They're not factoring data or any of that. They're not even comparing the black community to these other communities in context, right? So let's go through some things just so that we can have some way to ground this conversation. So I won't be using anecdotes and the one-off stories to prove my point. In America, entrepreneurship is at a 40-year low. Not just for black people, but for Americans. That's number one. 40-year low. So that's not Generation X fault because they were kids. It's definitely not millennials' fault because they were just being born in 1981. So, which means the oldest millennial is 40 years old at this point, maybe 41 years old, depending. But no, 40 years old. All right, let's keep on going. In China right now, they're having a conversation about their boys and their young men being too soft. China just started opening up in the early 70s when Kissinger went to China, Henry Kissinger, which means that this happened in 50 years. It only took them about 2 generations, 3 generations if we're being generous. So within 2 to 3 generations, that had happened. While their economy is growing exponentially. In Japan right now, their women don't want to get married, don't want to have children, to the point where their birth rate is somewhere around 1.4, 1.5. In South Korea, same, but their birth rate is somewhere between 0.9 and 1.0. Right? So when we talk about black women not wanting to get married, this is not exclusively a black woman thing. This comes with modernity. The black community just felt it first and felt it the hardest, and excuse the sexual pun, because of their socioeconomic position in this society and because of their history, right? Some of our brothers and sisters are making arguments, black men and black women are making arguments either without the facts or without things put in context. That's why I'm grounding this conversation. You look at the child out of wedlock birth rate in Britain for white people, for example, right? You look at that number increasing throughout the Western world, throughout the developed world. Why I'm bringing these things up is to once again ground the conversation in some reality. Because what often happens in the black community is that we insult each other, not knowing the history, not knowing the facts, not knowing what's been written and spoken about. I said this earlier. Some of you already know this number. According to the American Enterprise Institute, 26% of poor Americans are married, 39% of middle class, 56% of upper middle class and above. And this data came out pre-COVID. So this is before COVID-19. We knew these numbers. We also know that there's a separation, a big separation happening between the top 20% of Americans and the bottom 80. So upper middle class Americans, they're growing the gap. And it's not just a wealth gap, it's a dream gap. As a matter of fact, an author named Richard Reeves, who also works for the Brookings Institute, he wrote a book about that. He called it Dream Hoarders. Because they're not just hoarding the wealth. And they're not just playing guard dog for the top 1%. They're taking all the dreams off the table. And they're actively, and this is what his book was saying, they're actively blocking people from the bottom 80 into climbing into the top 20%. But how many of you know that? How many of you know that? See, it's one thing if we're going to assume that the black community isn't making moves because they're not trying. It's a different conversation when we're talking about people actively sabotaging them. A lot of these things are happening once again, and black men and black women just refuse to factor it in. It is so easy to be anti-black in this society, and that includes black people being anti-black and finding all little excuses to do so. You're only 50 years out of Jim Crow, if even 50 years, because laws were being stricken down all through the 70s and even 80s. All through your little municipalities and your cities and your states and your counties. But a lot of black people do not care to know that. You don't want to know, you don't care to know. You're just like, why aren't black people rich and prosperous now? There is so much information that's so easily accessible if you would just look and if you care to know. But you don't care to know because you want to do what you want to do anyway. You want to chastise and belittle and demean the black community regardless. And that's okay. But when you're speaking to someone like Mr. Z, you're going to have to come with the data, not just your anecdotal experiences. I am all for the debate, for whoever wants to have that conversation. But this left-leaning and right-leaning argument in the black community that we use to chastise black people, and in this video, it's not only black women. I'm not going after black women in this video, especially not exclusively black women. We have to have an honest conversation about what's happening in the Western world, definitely in America. This is the cost of modernity. This is the cost of modernity. That's my whole point for those of you that haven't understood it yet. Now, that doesn't mean that some of us won't get married. Some of us won't have children and have children in a traditional nuclear family. And some of us won't even stay married. That's not saying that. That doesn't mean that everything's screwed for everyone. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the gamble just got a whole lot tougher. And a lot of your children are deciding not to gamble. I'm saying how much money you make matters so much more now than it did even in the 90s. Your income bracket matters so much more, or that tax bracket matters so much more. We can literally track people's lives through numbers now. How much money do you make? What region of the country you live in? What's your race? How old are you? All right, I can track what you're most likely to be in your career. I could track how much money you probably make. I could track how likely you are to get married, how likely you are to get divorced. I could track all of that. We even have articles being written about how we can track a person's life trajectory or their broad life trajectory based off of the zip code that they were born in and the zip code that they were raised in. Literally, we have articles and videos actually now speaking about that. A lot of this is way more predictable than y'all would like to realize. Some of the brothers in this space, we speak about automation all the time. We speak about machine learning all the time. And then we forget to make the connection about how predictable some of these things are. Why am I tying this into this conversation about race? Because it's that predictable. The social engineers know that they've made black Americans the permanent underclass. They understand that. They talk about that all the time. There was an ExxonMobil CEO that spoke about this. These things are so predictable, and yet we have black people, black men and black women, who are so incensed about what's going on in the black community that you don't care about any of this. All you know is the black girl that overlooked you in college, or all you know is the black boy that didn't pay attention to you in high school. That's all y'all know. And y'all go on with that resentment all through your 20s, and your 30s, and your 40s, and your 50s, and so on. Holding on to that anger. And now that we have social media, you spew that anger out as some weird form of constructive criticism. Some of you are in relationships with other black people. Some of you are not in relationships with other black people. You're single, or you're in an interracial relationship. And you're screaming about divesting from the black community or SYSBM. I'm not against any of that. Do what you do, but y'all not doing what y'all do. Y'all walking out the door, kicking over things on the way out the door, trying to break the door down on the way out the door, yelling at the patrons or the people inside the house on the way out. Well, you're already out the door and you're still talking. You're walking out the fence and you're still talking. You're getting into the car, you're still talking. You down the block at the stop sign, you're still talking. Y'all just we're talking about adults, people, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and older that are throwing tantrums online about how black men are nothing, or black women are nothing, or the black community writ large is nothing. Calling the black community Blackistan, calling it all type of... You literally would think you're listening to the most virulent KKK or neo-Nazi. And these are black people. That childhood trauma is real, y'all. Those mommy and daddy issues are real. That rejection PTSD is real. The reason why I've made these videos over the past few months, and thank you to all my followers, is because you can definitely see how these things impact other black people. And these people are educated sometimes, they're well spoken, they're in great career fields. But the second you start talking about the opposite sex in the black community, they turn to emotional 7-year-olds. You want to talk about arrested development. And these people oftentimes claim to be objective. They claim to be facts over feelings. They don't care about perspective when you start talking about the opposite sex in the black race. All they want to hear is black women ain't nothing and black men ain't nothing. That's all they want to hear. If you're not saying that, they don't want to hear it. And I think I'm coming to a close now. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. This thing to me, to Mr. Z, this is beyond foolish. Once again, the black community is only 50 years out of Jim Crow. COVID should have showed y'all. COVID happened. COVID showed you and was very in your face about how many Americans were barely making it. A bunch of people y'all thought had it together. Non-black people you thought had it together couldn't survive couldn't survive without a paycheck for 2 and 3 months. I'll give y'all those numbers again. 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And from my understanding, 60% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. And in that system, that's the system where you chastise black people for not being industrious enough. In that system, you're chastising black people for not owning enough businesses. Once again, entrepreneurship is at a 40-year low in America. It's probably going to go up since COVID, and a bunch of buildings being abandoned, and offices being abandoned, and probably cheaper real estate on that end. Maybe crime rates were decreasing up until COVID. So there's just so much data, but yet black people just refuse to look this up. Black people are still talking like we're living in the 1990s. Or the 1980s, where you had to travel across town, spend a whole day at the library to find certain things, to find certain things. You're a 20-second, 30-second Google search away. But that's not what y'all want to hear. Y'all are literally taking on the worst, most pernicious, disgusting parts of white leftism or white rightism. Y'all have turned this into a culture now. You're not just politically right or politically left. You've turned it into a culture. So now you're literally just a chocolate dip white liberal or a chocolate dip white conservative. And you regurgitate all the same talking points that those people do. The only difference with black people is you just couch it as constructive criticism and tough love, instead of just admitting outright that you're just anti-black. And just like it only took China 50 years for their boys to become what they call softer, it only took 50 years for black people to sound like this about other black people. Give or take a year or two. So I'll pause right there in earnest. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. But this anti-Blackness in the Black community, it's insane. And I don't know, it solves nothing. That's the thing. You're just spewing your rhetoric out for no reason. It actually solves nothing. It doesn't move the needle nearly as much as you think it does. Because oftentimes you're asking Black people to ignore their personal experiences and just go off of what you think and what you believe. Excuse how I pronounce believe, right? And I'll end it right there. I'll pause right there. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments.